My guests today are Hannah Mackay and Lauren Umloff, former teachers who co-founded the Dandelion Project, an unschooling community in Philadelphia that offers daytime programming for homeschoolers as well as after-school programs and summer camps that emphasize self-directed education. They also do homeschooling evaluations for homeschoolers throughout Pennsylvania through an unschooling lens. Hannah and Lauren, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for having us. We're so excited to be in this conversation today.
I'm so glad to have you. It was such a treat to visit the Dandelion Project when I was recently in Philadelphia, seeing what's happening there in terms of unconventional education models and especially the growth in self-directed education models over the past several years. And you're both very much a part of that. So I want to get into more discussion around the Dandelion Project and your vision for this unschooling community. But let's start with each of your backgrounds. You're both former teachers, and I'd love to hear from each of you what got you interested in education to begin with. What was your pathway into the conventional classroom and then ultimately the unconventional one? So I don't know who wants to go first.
Go for
Hannah,
it.
you go ahead.
Lauren.
All right. I mean, I'd be so happy to share.
Hannah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so thank you so much. So I am a former English teacher. I taught middle and high school English in a variety of classrooms, both in central Pennsylvania and in the Philadelphia area. And, I really got into wanting to be a teacher because from a pretty young age, I had like a deep desire to become the kind of grown-up that I really needed as a young person. School for me was really a respite and a place of kind of relief from a pretty toxic like home situation. And yeah, I found a lot of myself through like writing and reading and being in like imaginary lands, and was lucky enough to have different teachers along the way that really like stood up for me and could see me um, despite everything going on in my personal life. And as I became like an older teen, I really got interested in the education system, interested in how learning could be like relevant and meaningful, um, and got into like Penn State's education program, like really imagining that I was going to be able to like help radically transform the system from the inside out. And, just had lots of ideas about how young people could really use their classroom experience to learn about themselves, learn about their backgrounds, bring their stories alive. Um, but as I was in the system, I was really noticing how much gets in the way of that being possible. And my grand ideas for like being able to radically transform things from the inside out became less and less possible. And I think when I was teaching high school, it was also the same time that my oldest child, who is almost 12 now, was starting kindergarten. And at that time, I was able to really spend a lot of time in her classroom and get to see different ways that teachers were interacting with young people, what the system looked like for young people. And I was really disheartened by how much kind of like sitting and waiting and like punishment was happening. And I think that that experience of really seeing how it was impacting my 5-year-old at the time was helping me also kind of pan out in a wider way of seeing that even though so much could function differently in my classroom and young people could be, really inspired to do the things that matter most, learn about the things that matter most, read the things that matter most, that it wasn't really widespread. Like it wasn't really catching in a way that more young people had access to that. And I think it also helped me see the ways in which I was inadvertently like creating harm in my classroom because of how the systems are set up. Um, and once I could see that so clearly, I couldn't unsee it.
Right.
And that was the kind of turning point in my career as an educator, where I just knew that I couldn't stay in a conventional classroom anymore, because I really believe in the power and brilliance and wisdom of young people and needed to have new and different ways of, helping them usher their ideas into the world. And Lauren and I have known each other for a really long time, and that was about the same time that a new alternative school in Philadelphia was popping up, Philly Agile Learning Community. And within just a couple of months of kind of this big awakening in my own life as an educator, our family picked up and moved from central Pennsylvania to Philadelphia to embark on this journey of unschooling and self-directed education.
It's an incredible story. Lauren, let's turn to you and hear about your pathway to education and then ultimately alternative education.
Yeah, I think I always wanted to be a teacher. I mean, schools were a place where I felt really successful. Um, I felt really affirmed as the kind of like student I was. Um, and so I think that was always part of my goal for myself. And then when I started teaching in a classroom very briefly in Kensington, um, which is a part of Philadelphia that's been really hit by like the opioid epidemic, I saw really quickly um, not only that schools, the system of schooling was incompatible with learning and wasn't like a fertile ground for like anything I knew about like the best conditions for learning, and also that it was in a lot of ways like a bad place for kids to even be and live, and how so many needs were unmet. And so I left and didn't continue. I had my first child, who's also almost 12, at the same time. And my next job was at a community, a cooperative preschool. And there I got to have a completely different experience of learning. And that experience was learning in community, a learning space that was nestled in a community and that was for young people and also for their families, where families were in like real, true, direct support of each other, both in like thinking about how to parent in new ways than maybe we'd been parented ourselves, what healing looks like as adults and the healing that we confront, particularly as parents, and what self-directed ed could look like for the youngest kids. And so I think when my oldest was about to graduate from there, I was like, why would this ever end? And when I was touring public schools in Philly, I still thought that I would send my kids there. I still wanted to invest there and be part of change and use kind of like the resources that I have at my disposal towards like improving or enhancing that space. And then I toured and was reminded of everything that's immovable there, and was really reminded of my experience teaching and couldn't do it. So we sent my oldest to the Philly Free School, and we had a really like enlightening experience there. And my husband and I learned so much about self-directed ed, and it kind of like crystallized my path as an educator and as someone in supportive learning, that like I was never going to go back to kind of conventional schooling and those kinds of ideas around how to be in support of other people's learning. At the same time, I helped form the South Philly Co-op preschool in my neighborhood. So my neighborhood would have kind of the same community learning experience in early childhood ed, and then joined with Philly ALC families and being like part of the first year of that space. And yeah, I think Ken and I had known each other for a long time. The pandemic hit. I was kind of wanting something like a little bit different than we'd experienced thus far. And I think this happens all across unschooling spaces is, people, as people get more settled and more clarity around the things that they want to grow in unschooling, sometimes new places pop up from places that existed before. And I think that's kind of where Hannah and I landed with launching the Dandelion Project.
Great. So Lauren, just a follow-up question there, and then another one for you, Hannah. You said, when you toured the elementary school for your child, that it was unmovable. And I wonder, why is that, do you think? Why is change within the system not possible, especially with visionaries like you who really have the desire, and I'm sure it's so many other teachers do too. I hear from them all the time that they have this desire to change the system from within, but find that it's immovable. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, they're huge, I think. I think it's like because we are like living under like racialized capitalism. And so I think there's like an underlying function of schools that like prepare us to like enter a workforce, that condition us in certain ways that like allow our culture to replicate. I think that it's also such a big system right now that it feels really hard to like reimagine it while so many families are dependent upon it. I think we as families stay invested in it too as the thing that we knew and we survived, so it's okay enough for our young people. I think that's also part of my story, is that like as I'm like reparenting myself in order to become the parent I want to be for my young people, I'm realizing how the success I had in school like hurt my soul, how I became so disconnected from myself, how I became oriented towards people pleasing and production and output and productivity and all kinds of things that don't actually bring me into better relationship with myself and my family and my community. But I think that we are really kind of stuck as a culture in a narrative that like that school does support us in like achieving our goals. And I really disagree with that.
And what about for you, Hannah? You were in the system teaching, but it wasn't until you saw the system through sort of the kindergarten lens with your own child that you realized that it wasn't a good match and it wasn't a good place for learning. I'm just curious about that. What was it? I mean, you were in the system, so why didn't you already see it? What was it about seeing it through the eyes of your child that sort of made you suddenly realize things weren't working well?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I should clarify that I really could see a lot of ways that the school system wasn't working and functioning. When I was at Penn State, I had the opportunity to lead a research project in a variety of middle school classrooms where the guiding research question was, how do we make learning relevant and meaningful to young people's actual lives? Like, I have this deep trust and knowing and belief that young people are living whole, rich, meaningful lives right now. And so often our schools kind of continue this narrative that our lives don't actually matter until we're like grown-ups and can be like producers in the world. Um, and through that research over and over again, what we were finding was that classroom learning isn't relevant and meaningful to young people's lives. No matter how, there's so much work about, well, just be like a culturally responsive teacher and invite young people's lives into the classrooms and do all of these things. But even when teachers are doing that to the very best of their ability, the classroom setting just isn't relevant and meaningful to the real lives that young people are experiencing right now. So I went into my teaching career knowing that already, or feeling that, like seeing that enacted in so many different classrooms with teachers who are really giving it their all, really trying everything that they could do to make learning relevant, to invite young people's lives into the classrooms, to create safer spaces for real community building and connection and storytelling and listening. And the major response from young people was kind of just like, ugh, like this isn't even connected. Like, why are you asking me about my real life? This doesn't even make sense.
Mm.
But when those same kinds of questions were brought up in like the young people's actual communities, in their actual neighborhoods, in their actual homes, the amount that they would share about their lives was just amazing and incredible. So I went into teaching knowing or having this inner knowing that like whatever was happening in my classroom was maybe not going to be as meaningful and relevant as like my ideal is for learning and for working with young people. But I did as much as I could. I very much was inviting young people to read anything that they want to read, write about anything that matters to them, write their
Mm.
narratives, write stories of their family, write about their experiences, share it, push back against dominant narratives about young people that are only a single story and not the whole story. Um, so I was seeing all of that, but I was also feeling really inspired by all of the things that were possible when storytelling and listening were at the core of my classroom. And I was really, fortunate to be an English teacher and be able to kind of frame my classroom in that way. Um, but I also really recognize that, like Lauren was saying, like the system is so big and so many of the structures of like the way we do things are already so ingrained that it's hard to move it. We have curriculums that predetermine everything that a young person is like supposed to know or supposed to learn. We have all of these state tests that supposedly measure like how intelligent or smart a young person is when all of the research actually shows that those tests just show how good of a test taker a young person is. But we're so committed to these things, for funding, yeah, mostly for funding, that, we look at school systems and like they even get grades now on how great a school system is, but all of those grades really show us is like how well their young people take tests. And research also shows that very much is determinant on like the kinds of privileges and access and opportunities young people have in their schools and neighborhood. So while my young person being in kindergarten highlighted in such an extreme way that schools were not suitable, were not supportive of the actual needs of young people. I think I had been feeling that all along the way, but still had a lot of hope in my heart for what was possible.
Mm. Really fascinating. So then you found your way, both of you, to some of the other self-directed education communities in Philadelphia. And it was COVID that sort of launched you into the process of creating the Dandelion Project and wanting something even different, but still very self-directed for your children and others in your community. I wonder if you could tell us about that startup journey. If I recall correctly, it started outside, sort of a program with no walls in a park, but I'd love to hear kind of that origin and the startup process. Lauren.
Yeah, we were on and had been going to these like facilitator calls that the Alliance for Self-Directed Ed had been hosting and is still hosting for people who are facilitating spaces like ours or thinking about it, like meet up and like talk about different topics. And we just happened to be at one with a person who was um, basically running a flying squad in Martha's Vineyard, like had a van, would pick kids up, and then they would spend the day deciding collectively how to spend their time on like 100 square miles. And I think that was just the like, we'd heard of flying squads before, but I think that was the thing that sparked us to be like, oh, wait, this idea of like a building in Philadelphia, which is like millions maybe if we bought one, or so expensive if we didn't, like we could think around that block and get more creative. And at the time I had just started volunteering at FDR Park, which is a huge like almost 350-acre park in Philadelphia. And I had a new connection there. And so we went to FDR and we pitched them an idea of like an completely outdoor unschool. And we loved the idea of like reimagining like how public land and public space could be used to support spaces like this. And and also positioning young people to like have access to that land, you know, to be like people who can show up at any time of day and like and use that community resource. So that's how we started. And we operated 2 days a week. We bought a humongous event tent for cold, rainy days, which there were a lot of them that first year. We had a lot of outdoor fires. We spent a lot of time talking and reflecting and practicing what it means to be environmental stewards in a city, and what public land needs from us, what our obligation is to land, how we're in relationship with land in ways we don't aren't always conscious of. And yeah, we had like a really beautiful experience and learned so much and made a lot of mistakes, built a lot of relationships, and yeah, and I think that really positioned us to move into the form we've taken today.
Hannah, what were your reflections from that startup year? This was 2021, is that right, when you started outside at FDR?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what were your reflections from that initial year outside?
Well, I'm so glad that Lauren brought up the Wander Bus of Martha's Vineyard, because that does feel like such a moment of like seeing our own blocks. You know, prior to that, we had really been visioning like this intergenerational unschooling community. We really believe that like freedom shouldn't happen in a vacuum, like that freedom, you know, creating an unschool space where young people can pursue the things that most matter to their heart, that are driven by their interests and passions and identities, shouldn't just be kind of like in this center, disconnected from the rest of the world. And we really see that, like, you know, one thing maybe that separates us or is a little bit different about us than other unschooling spaces is that we really see that grownups do have a really important role in unschooling communities. And I think that we got to start really living into that in our first year. You know, like Lauren was saying, really supporting young people in understanding their agency when it comes to environmental stewardship, what it means to come together in community, how we can build skills around cooperation and collaboration. And I think we got to do that in some really interesting ways while we were entirely outdoors together, because while we were also, you know, navigating interests and building community, we were also in the very real context of like the environment and what is happening. And I think so often we, especially folks growing up in cities, we kind of feel disconnected from our ecosystem. We kind of feel like we're something separate from our environment. And in that first year, I really felt like our whole community was more a part of the natural world and could really see ourselves as part of that natural world, which means that we can also see that we have the power to change what's happening in the world. Um, I do have to say that now that we are in a building space, I'm like so grateful for some things, like some things that were really not possible, like any kind of project that involves paper that's going to go blowing away in the wind, is now way more possible. You know, we're able to like screen media together and, you know, really look at that together, and understand the messages that we're receiving and understand like the real things happening in the world by watching those things together. So there's a lot that's more possible now in our building, and there's also like a lot that's less possible. So this new iteration in a building space really does feel like our second pilot year. We're learning so much. Our program has transformed so much from pilot year 1 to pilot year 2. And
Yeah.
it's special. Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful space, so colorful. I think it's purple, right, on the outside, and then just this lovely, warm, welcoming space inside. And Lauren, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the services that you're currently providing or the programming that you're currently offering. So tell us a little bit more about what the week looks like, as well as the sort of homeschool consultation evaluations that you and Hannah do.
Sure. So Wild Seeds ALC is our daytime program, our unschooling in community. It's what's most similar to our first year, to pilot year one. This was the only program we were running then. Oh, well, actually, we ran summer camp that summer.
And emails.
Yeah, that's true. But the only in-person program until the summer. And that's Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 9 to 3. And we're in ALC, so we use agile learning tools, which we could talk more about.
Yeah, could you just talk just briefly about that, Lauren, just to
Sure.
explain the ALC model, one of the early kind of networks of self-directed learning centers, and now, of course, seen that flourish throughout the world. So tell us a little bit about ALC.
Yeah, so like agile learning centers or communities, it's like a framework for unschooling in community, and it's a collection of tools to kind of like organize community around. And so one of the tools is a set the week calendar, or we use it as a set the day calendar because we have young kids, so it's more helpful to go through our calendar and the things that are happening daily. So we start our morning with a whole group where we go through like what's on offer for the day. And offerings are drawn from our parking lot, which is another tool. That's where we house like all the ideas. So kids can directly write their ideas for offerings, the things they want to offer, the things they want facilitators to offer, the things they want us to find outside experts or parents or other community members to offer. And then during set the day, we just kind of go through them, what's on offer, and they're all optional. Unless there was a prior commitment. If we're using like a community resource like money or someone's time, we might ask kids to commit to that. And then we do small groups where we do another critical part of like the agile learning framework, which is we set intentions for the day. So we come together in small groups, kind of check in. We do a lot of like skill building around community building skills, communication, sharing space, talk about things that are happening in the world, examine our culture, name our identity, explore our feelings, and yeah, just like get to know each other. But we also set intentions for the day. So we hear what everyone wants to get up to, things that were on the offerings board, things that weren't, ways that they want to connect, and also like what kind of person they want to be that day. And then we move into the rest of our day, which is the scheduled offerings, one of which is, for us, is always an outdoors trip. And so kids opt in and out of them, and then they self-direct their time throughout that entire time. So some of that's joining offerings, and some of that's initiating and engaging in play, discussions, reading, very occasionally napping, like whatever they're feeling that day. And then we come back together at the end of the day after a community cleanup for small groups where we reflect on the day. Did we do the things we said we were going to do? Yes. How did that go? No. Oh, how did that go? Did that left turn serve you? Do you wish you had done the thing that you said you intended? So it's just kind of scaffolding this process of like learning independently, like setting the intention, having the experience of the intention, reflecting on it, wondering how it went in order to plan forward for yourself, and then sharing out with a group, which is part of the Agile process. We also use a check-in change-up process, which is how we address conflict in community. So this isn't like one-on-one conflict, but this is more kind of like things that are happening in a more widespread way, and also the community conditions that maybe we need to adjust to meet the needs of everyone in the community. And so how that happens is someone brings an awareness. It could be a facilitator, it could be a young person. It could come The young person could speak it out in the meeting. They could share it with their parent who shares it with us. They could share it to a single facilitator who shares it on their behalf. There's an anonymous feedback form. There's like no barriers to how you could share that you're having a need. But once you share that need, one example might be people are pranking me and I don't like being pranked. And then we bring it to the group and say, hey, is anyone else having this experience? Kind of collect all the information about the experience. And then the group has an opportunity to brainstorm a solution. So once we have all of the brainstorms collected, we pick what feels like good enough to try, safe enough for now. And then we move into a period of practice, and we practice that solution and see if it addresses the need. So we practice it, come back, reflect. We just did this with some competition agreements, like how to be like good sports. And when we came back to reflect on it, we realized, oh, we actually needed to add a few things, like a couple other things came up. So now we'll add those things and move it back into practice, and then we'll reflect on it again. And once we come to things that are really working to address the need, that moves into a community agreement. And so, yeah, I think these are the agile processes that we use, the agile learning processes, and they're really helpful. And I think that different ALCs use them in different ways. And then we also run an aftercare program, which happens after the Wild Seeds Day is over, and we pick up from local elementary schools. And it's just a beautiful time to like respect, connect, and support with young people who are still in conventional schools, and to support them in, you know, really reaching and understanding their own autonomy, like working through conflict processes that are positive and generative, and building community building skills. And we use a Set the Afternoon, which is just like our Set the Day. And we use really like similar tools with that group. And we've been loving connecting with other families in our community through aftercare. It's been really even cooler than I imagined it would be, and more gratifying. And then we run summer camp, winter camp, spring camp, and use all the same tools. We're using the Set the Day. We are going into small groups where, using like a modified kind of check-in change up. Yeah. And then Hannah, do you want to talk about homeschooling evals? Because you kind of really lead that for us.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I would say homeschool evaluation was one of the initial ways that I really stepped into like support unschooling families in Philadelphia. In that first year of living in Philadelphia and supporting Philly ALC getting going, I learned about what homeschoolers have to do in Pennsylvania in order to stay legally compliant. And it was a lot. The law is daunting and overwhelming and pages long of requirements. But I really had like a desire to support unschoolers in being able to interpret those laws and make it work for their families and for their own learning journeys. So way back then, I think the first year that I started doing homeschool evaluation for unschoolers in Philly, about 25 families signed up, and it was such an exciting time to connect with all different families that I hadn't met before and find out kind of like what they're doing, what they're up to, their approach to unschooling, how that was uh, just looking in their families, how they were connecting. And the next year, I opened it up in a broader way, and then the pandemic happened and what started as like 20 some families, just multiplied, and now we're serving hundreds of families across the state of Pennsylvania with unschool supportive homeschool evaluations. um, it is so exciting. There are just so many incredible families really passionate about unschooling, really trusting that young people know themselves and know their passions, know what they're interested in, and are supporting them in pursuing paths that make sense for them. And and that's so special. And one thing that comes up year after year is that there are all of these incredible families doing this work, and that so many of them feel so isolated and feel so kind of disconnected. So many families talk about how maybe there is a rich homeschool community in their community, but it isn't really with folks like doing unschooling, or that they haven't really quite found their community yet where they could talk to other families and really build community. And I'm excited to share that we are finally at a place as an organization to be developing more projects in support of those families. So, this fall, we're going to be launching a membership for families, mostly in the Philadelphia region, but also could be expanded outwards for families across Pennsylvania who want to connect, and we're going to be growing lots of different communities for families to gather for field trips and for more informal gatherings to connect, and like through workshops and discussion groups and opportunities to really just get to know each other and hold space for that. And I'm excited about this because there are, like I said, just so many amazing families doing this work, and who knows what the possibilities will be when more of us are able to come together and connect meaningfully.
Hannah, if I can just sort of follow up there as we begin to wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of where you think we're going in terms of alternative education and self-directed education in particular, specifically in Pennsylvania and in your area of Philadelphia. You were someone who was a part of this self-directed education community pre-pandemic. You've now seen even more interest there. What is your sense of the future?
I love that question. Really, I am just feeling so inspired and grateful that there are so many different unschooling communities like popping up. And I don't know what the future holds, but the hope in my heart is that there will be more self-directed learning communities that are accessible to any family who's interested in this way of life. And I think we're really trying to imagine different ways of making unschooling as accessible as possible to as many families as possible. And, that's why we're doing some really specific programs just for unschoolers, and also broadening our scope to invite new families into these ideas, and inviting young people who are in conventional schools into these ideas. My hope is that by the time I'm ready to retire, although I laugh that I'll probably never retire. That's probably not in the cards. But my hope is that, over the next few decades, we will see thriving communities of unschools that are available to everybody. That's my hope. And I think there is a desire, and I think there is a need, and I hope that we can find more funders and places that are willing to uh, help support this work and help support it growing so that it is more possible and accessible for families.
Love it. So, Lauren, as we sort of conclude our conversation, I'd love to hear from you about advice that you might have for others listening who might be inspired by your story and want to create something similar, some kind of unschooling community in their area. What advice would you have for them?
Well, I think my advice is what we're trying to do for other people through all of our programs, which is to find other people who are identifying that this way of living is harder and more hurtful than it needs to be, and who want to reimagine a new way with you. And I think that's why we are wanting to connect with people in all different kinds of schools, and why we want to unschooling community versus in our homes, at least part of it. And so I think the other big advice that I give people when they're starting on this is to do a values brainstorm, and to be what really is important for my young people and for me in this life. What is at the center for us? And then how do you reorient kind of a life slowly around the things that you actually value, and not around the things that we're told to value, which is a future occupation. And for us, I think we really have moved relationships into the center. And then that changes and helps us kind of navigate our own fears, and also find the people that we feel really aligned with to connect with, and then brainstorm how to build community around those values and connections.
Mhm. So, Lauren, if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about the Dandelion Project and connect with you all, what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, our website, which is the dandelionproject.us, which
As in
outlines
us, not
Yeah.
us as in us.
Which outlines kind of all of our programs, our values. It has our contact information. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And I think that we're pretty accessible on all of those platforms. Like we love to connect and we are interested in meeting people. So I think we're really pretty responsive.
Amazing. Well, I wish you the best as your program continues to grow. Lauren Umloff and Hannah Mackay, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much for having us, Carrie. We really enjoyed it and appreciate your time.